Good afternoon, everyone. We are excited to have you here for the fourth part of our series, Universal Design for Learning and Career and Technical Education. Just a little housekeeping items before we get started this afternoon. All attendees are in listen-only mode. So if you would like to participate, we invite you to ask questions in that question box that's right there on the left-hand part of your screen. You can also raise your hand if you feel like it, but we have so much content, we really haven't been able to get to people asking questions, so post those questions in the question box, and Amanda and Melissa will address those. We are back today with CAST. Melissa and Amanda are going to be leading us through Universal Design for Learning with Career and Technical Education. Again, this series is sponsored by the Illinois State Board of Education and brought to you by the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support. So with that, I'd like to welcome everyone. Hope you all are safe and healthy at home, and I'm going to hand the floor over to Melissa.
Hello, everybody. So great to be back. I've already seen a couple of people come through saying that they're back again. So glad to see everybody back again. We are on our fourth of our webinar series, and today we'll be talking about Universal Design for Learning and Career and Technical Education. Before I navigate off this slide, and also Amanda will put it in the chat, but I want us to look here at this bit.ly. This is the bit.ly that we'll use for today. It'll bring you to these slides. And then once you get those slides, you can make a copy or just follow along if you'd like, or you could just follow along on your screen.
Melissa, do you also want to, is captioning something we want to make sure we turn on?
Oh, yes. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, we'll turn on these captions.
No problem. And I put bit.ly in the chat, so we're good to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So again, my name is Melissa Sanjay. I am an implementation specialist at CAST. And I've been at CAST for a couple years. Prior to CAST, I was in the Alternative Ed Network in Boston and worked in a school that had CTE as part of our curriculum. And so I'm really excited to talk about how we can get all learners involved in CTE through using UDL.
Awesome. Thanks, Melissa. And again, I'm Amanda Bastoni. I was a career and technical education teacher and career and technical education director, CTE director, and now I work for CAST in their workforce development department. And I wore a t-shirt today, "Nobody's perfect," with the misspelling of perfect, just to just because I'm feeling a little bit like COVID-19 is impacting my life. So if anyone is feeling that too, feel free to share that in the chat, and along the way share any questions or comments in the chat.
Great, thank you. I didn't notice it was misspelled, so I left that about your shirt. Start practicing for those of us who haven't used the question box. Part of this is to practice using the question box. If you ask a question in that box that we think other people we might reply publicly, and then it'll show up in the chat. So folks asked in the last webinar, how do I see things that you're referring to in the question box? If we've responded publicly, you'll see it in chat. So you'll have to go to a different box. So in that box, put in your name. You can answer any of these questions, one of these questions, or just think about them. But what's your name and what do you teach? How do you see UDL as useful for CTE education? If you've been with us and you kind of have a flavor of what UDL is, how do you see those two things interacting? And do you think there's a stigma around career technical education, or what used to be called vocational education? And if so, what is that stigma? So go to that question box and answer, and ones that seem great and relevant to everyone, Amanda will respond publicly, and you'll see that in the chat box. So our learning environment today, so we do this when we go to face-to-face meetings. We give people the permission to sit anywhere, stand, walk, eat anytime, fidget. We also give you that permission on a webinar and in Zoom, although you likely could have done any of those things without us knowing because you are on Zoom and your cameras are off. But please feel free, if it helps your learning, anything that helps advance your learning, do that. And the same thing for perception. We want to do everything possible to help you advance your learning. So we provide options around these slides that are screen shared, but also we allow you to take those slides, make a copy, take notes, and as Amanda reminded us, we turn on the captions because those help people perceive. And in fact, at our last webinar, Sam mentioned, once you caption something, you've already provided two options. You've provided the option to watch and to listen, and or to read. So that was a big takeaway for me from the last webinar. And then in terms of action and expression, you can use that question box. We don't have the options to raise our hands or doodle in this environment, but you can doodle on your own, or you can take notes in a notebook or anything that advances your learning. So as I said, we are at webinar 4, fourth in a series. The first 3 have been recorded. They were on the UDL core concepts, the underpinnings of UDL, the theory behind it. Webinar 2 was on UDL in practice, and that's the UDL design process. How do I take this guidelines document and apply it to a lesson? How do I use it? And then webinar 3 was UDL in a virtual environment. We talked a lot about tech tools and access to tech and how to make things accessible when we're teaching virtually. And then today, we're moving into UDL and CTE, so in career and technical education. So our goals for today are to get to know each other a little bit, and we did a little of that already, and we're going to review UDL. So we want you to kind of activate that background knowledge about what UDL is as quickly as possible. And then we want you at the end of this to be able to articulate the benefits of CTE, career and technical education, for our students and for our society, and then be able to leverage these UDL concepts and strategies in CTE environments and apply those to CTE environments so that the lessons can become more universally designed and a more diverse group of students can be involved. So our quick review of UDL. We put this slide up with the definition to kind of review it, and hoping every time you see this definition, you dig in a little deeper and you think about something different. So as we look at this definition, another thing you could do is to jot down in your notebook or send out into the question box your goals for this session. Once you know what the goals are for that we have designed, the learning goals, what is your particular goal? We know our brains are goal directed, so once you identify that goal, you'll pay attention to the things that are relevant to you after you've set that intention. So as you look at the definition, or we go over some of the other later slides, your brain's already primed to grab onto those things that will be useful to you to meet that goal of what you want to get out of this session. So our goal for today is our definition of UDL is universal design and learning is an approach to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all by setting clear and rigorous goals, anticipating barriers, and proactively designing to minimize those barriers. And we went over that. That embedded in that is our UDL design process. We went over that in session 2, but we think about our goals, we make them clear without the means embedded. We anticipate our barriers using that UDL framework, and we proactively design to minimize those barriers, also using those UDL guidelines and that UDL framework. Underpinning that UDL framework, the values and theory underneath are that the barrier is in the environment and not the learner. So when we look to make things more accessible, we look to make things easier to perceive for students, we look at the design. We take the personalities out of it, and we look at the design and we think about what options can we build in to make those lessons more open. Our second underpinning is variability is the norm. We know that all brains are different, just like fingerprints, that everybody is different. So it's not as if somebody's abnormal and can't access my lesson, but everybody is different. And so we have to design for that, which brings us to our last underpinning, that although everybody is so different, we don't have to design 30 different lessons for our 30 students in our classroom, but rather we know that variability is predictable around certain lines, around that engagement network, that perception network, and that action and expression network. So it's predictable, and we know where people tend to vary in learning, and that can be designed for, and we can give options within that using our UDL guidelines. The last thing before I turn it over to Amanda, I want to point us to is that CAST has a free digital book on our website, so you can use this URL here. You can write it down. Amanda can put it in the chat. But also, if you forget to do that and you've lost the slides, you can always just Google Universal Design for Learning, Theory and Practice, and it'll bring you to the website. And in the website, there's these kind of embedded options that are very UDL, with videos, and you can have it read to you, and pop-outs and pictures and different explanations. So that is available for deeper learning after you watch this webinar series and you want to know more. So I'll turn it over to you, Amanda.
Awesome. So getting some great responses in the question area and in the chat, and I will reflect on those a little bit later. I did want to let Amy know, who's listening, that folks are interested in viewing the other webinars. So maybe at the end we can share with people, Amy, how that's possible. So let's just touch on why CTE is important in general. I think this is a great place to start, so we're all on the same page, and it will help us address that stigma a little bit. So if you want to advance the slide, Melissa, that'd be great. So career and technical education, or CTE, I want us all to watch. This is a 2-minute video. Melissa, you do need to click on the link because it's not on YouTube, it's on Venmo or some other, so you'll be okay.
And then I just big,
yep.
Right? Tell me what.
Play, you can make it big down at the bottom.
We ready
and
to
while
roll?
you're watching this, while you're watching this video, can you think about the ways CTE supports the UDL checkpoint for engagement, which includes choice, relevance, authenticity, goal setting, collaboration, and community? And if you could just put your thoughts in the chat box, that would be wonderful. So watch the video and think about how CTE supports the UDL checkpoint for engagement.
That was my idea for high school, was just get it done. I just wanted to get high school done and get the heck out of here. But when I joined auto, now I don't even want to leave, to be honest. I want to stay here and just keep learning.
You know, each student is an individual, and we have to recognize that they're individuals and that they need different pathways to explore and to reach their best possible outcomes in a bright future. And I love the fact that CTE creates programs that allow students to find themselves.
And that's the secret of CTE, is it makes learning relevant. Students can see how it applies to their real life. When I went to high school, it wasn't for college-bound kids. And I found out that it's very much for college-bound kids now. I first got engaged with CTE by joining the first robotics team here. And then that opened me up to a series of engineering classes that got me more interested. I was able to, for free in public education, get my hands on technology and technical skills that would not be available to me otherwise.
One big advantage with CTE programs is not only learning things that you do like, but also learning things that you don't like, and learning that at an early stage.
The ability for a student coming out of Career and Tech Ed Center to find a passion in what they want to do is really tremendous. There's no other opportunities like it.
My grades were awful. I wouldn't even show up my sophomore year. And then I started the program my junior year, and I was at school every day. And I really wanted to come here, and it helped me succeed, not just in my CTE program, but in every other class as well.
When we talk with employers and industry folks who are looking to have students move into their industry, we say to them, you know, what are the skills that you're looking for students to have? They always say that what they're looking for is communication, collaboration, the ability to work on a team, and the ability to have ideas and bring those ideas to fruition.
It's not just, preparation for a job that you could get in the future. It could be applied to almost any field. If I didn't want to go into engineering, if I wanted to go into physics, or if I wanted to go into even writing, I could use the skills that I've learned in the CTE programs in those fields.
It's mind-blowing. The opportunity that CTE has offered both of my children is mind-blowing.
I feel ready for life, and I have my whole career set up. I can really see my future because of this program.
I am CTE.
I am CTE.
I am CTE.
We are absolutely a CTE family. I'm a believer.
I am CTE, and you can be too. Come check us out.
Great. Thanks everybody for watching that. I really appreciate it. As Melissa is transferring us back to the presentation, we had a response just saying that by design, CTE is very engaging, right? It's designed to be hands-on and active. Melissa, do you have any responses around, when you watch the video, how do you see the tenets of UDL playing out in CTE?
Well, in the definitely in the description that you gave, because that was you on the screen, the description you gave about relevance, and that it's they see what it is in their own life, and they can see these things that they're learning help them achieve their goals. So the goals are there and the goals are clear. I see that in the engagement network. And then in some of these instances, they're having to work with others. So they're having to learn how to collaborate and fix a car with multiple technicians, that sort of thing. So those are the ones that popped out to me.
Yeah, and Charles is weighing in that CTE also allows students to communicate in a variety of settings, right? So now they're having this experience communicating in a variety of settings. So that's awesome. You have the link to that video if you want to watch it. It was a project we did when I was the director, just to try to address that stigma. And I do want to say many people weighed in that there is a stigma around CTE, and part of our goal is to get rid of that stigma, but also to help you understand how UDL can be worked into or made a part of or inform the education around CTE. But so a lot of folks said it's a less than option, that CTE is seen as a less than option. And also Heather said it's seen as a less than academic option. And I think that's really important. We're going to talk about that, but what does that imply? That really implies that people who work in the trades don't use academic skills, right? Or aren't deep thinkers, or that somehow they make less of a contribution to society, when really right now what's happening, you know, a lot of our skilled people who have skills are still working. So really important stuff. So if you don't mind, Melissa, going on to the next slide, that'd be great. Okay, and you can just put all of these up so we can see all of them. So what makes CTE instruction different? And that's what everyone has really been hitting on, is that idea that CTE instruction is, it collaborates with the industry leaders, right? Educators in CTE are industry leaders. They had to work in industry. The context, as Melissa said already, leads to collaboration and leads to building community. And there's those connections with workforce. And we're going to talk about how deeper learning is really happening there. And the learning is very contextualized, right? And I think those are all things we want to happen for kids, irregardless of which classes they're in. But what I'm trying to do right now is set the framework and describe to you what CTE is. All right, we can move forward, Melissa. So this is really, I'll go over it really quick. I just wanted to touch on the history of CTE, and we don't talk politics in CHOP class, but I do want to remind everyone that Obama and Trump both agree on the importance of CTE. So it's when Perkins 5 passed in 2018, it was a bipartisan passing. So yay. So in 1917, vocational education was actually created, and it was changed in 1998 to reflect CTE, career and technical education, instead of that idea of vocational education. Then in 2006, we had the Carl D. Perkins Act, and then it was finally fully reauthorized in 2018. And I just want to remind everyone, CTE was originally created to help folks move into the middle class, and we had a couple of responses from audience members saying that they wish they had known about career and technical education earlier because they think it would have been a straighter path or more straight path to achieve the goals that they had set out. And I think that's really the idea of CTE. When you talk with folks about CTE, just remind them that it's a fallacy to think that, you know, we go from high school to college and we're successful. There are multiple pathways to get to where you want to go. And in many cases, it means going into the workforce and folks will pay for your education, right? So we just need to address the stigmas, and we need to keep talking about them. Okay, so we can move on. Melissa, next slide. So that being said, what I want to remind everyone, especially when we think about our populations that aren't as successful in high school or successful in school, participation in CTE has shown to increase the likelihood that students will graduate from high school, they'll increase their earning potential, and they're more likely to have full-time employment. And this comes right from the US Department of Education, and this is a 2019 finding. So, you know, that idea that that CTE is vocational education, it's for those other students that don't find success, really a misnomer. We can move on.
Oops. We're getting a lot of comments in the chat, Amanda, that you have a sold audience. They're way into CTE, and they want to know how can they take some of this and put it online. So as we
don't worry. We'll get to that, guys, I promise. What I'm trying to do is just demonstrate to us that there are things, here's where we're going with this. There are things that are already happening in CTE that are aligned with UDL practices. And the reason I want to point that out to everyone is because we want to enhance those things, right? And we want to know what we're doing and why we're doing it. So when I was a CTE director, we talked a lot with our educators about, look, you're already doing this well. Here's some research around why it's working. And then here's some ideas we want to pull in additional ideas. So I'll move through this part really quickly then, guys. So just deeper learning is happening in CTE. It's really important. There was a 2019 book called Deeper Learning. And basically the idea there was that they went out, 2 Harvard educators went out, did a ton of research, and they found out that deeper learning is really happening in our peripheral classes like drama, music, and CTE. But why is that happening is an important thing to think about. And the why really is it's happening because students are doing, right, what they're learning. They're actively engaged and actively doing what they're learning, and it becomes a form of apprenticeship for them, right? So Melissa, did you want to talk a little bit about, weigh in maybe on why doing what you're learning is important?
Yeah, this impacts our effective network. And so when we talk to regular ed teachers about giving students choice of topic or choice of route towards a goal, we do so because that activates that effective network, which is in the middle of the brain. It's also that part of the brain that keeps us alive, that, you know, that's where we store, like, how do we survive kind of information. And because of that, research has told us that if we don't engage that effective network in some way when we're learning, we can reproduce that skill in a classroom. So if I can redo it in a classroom, but I might not be able to transfer that skill or knowledge to the real world or to something different. So CTE naturally lends itself to, we're already engaging that effective network so that we can transfer these skills that we're learning maybe in shop class, and maybe that won't be my final career, but I can transfer some of that information that I've learned about collaboration to my next step in my career.
Great, that's perfect, Melissa. Okay, so let's move on. Let's get to some of the meat of this, right? So the last thing I just wanted to say, and here's another reason why it's important to talk about first what CTE is. We need to celebrate CTE because so often CTE educators are sitting in professional development that's meant for other educators, core educators, and wondering, why am I here? And maybe even feeling a little bit like they are also, you know, less relevant or not as important because it's an elective. So really trying to frame the idea that CTE might be an elective right now, but the deep learning is what's happening there. And many of the practices of UDL are already showing up. For example, in CTE, educators are really taking that deep dive into the context, not just skimming the surface. In CTE, we talk a lot about failure and how we have to learn from failure, learn from mistakes. And in CTE, we expect our students to build something, just like the peripheral classes. So students aren't using the lathe to you know, just learn how to use it. They're using the lathe and they make something for mom for Mother's Day. Or just like in soccer, students aren't learning to dribble the ball, they're learning to dribble the ball and then play in a game, right? And I just want to remind everyone that our CTE educators traditionally took alternative routes to become educators. It's important to put that in the back of our minds as we talk about how do we help CTE educators. We need to remember they took an alternative route to get to teaching. We also need to remember that they report wanting more professional development around students with disabilities and around students who are non-native English speakers, so English language learners. CTE teachers are looking for supports to work with those students and other special populations. So Melissa, now I think we go to reflect and refresh. Any thoughts? Yeah, so why UDL and CTE? Here we go, guys. We're getting into the nitty gritty. So you can go to the next one if you want, Melissa. Okay, so we know, let's follow along with me here. We're gonna get to some of the tangible practices in a second, but we know we need diversity, right? We need diversity in our STEM fields. And And it's really important that we have that, not just because it's PC and it feels good to make sure everyone's included. There's a story that I love to tell, which is Karen Wakerton was a biologist who described herself as a queer-informed biologist. She discovered that frogs will hatch early, their eggs will hatch early if they sense predators. She said, there are many factors that influenced my thinking, but my queerness was certainly a part of it. My personal experience reinforced that generally accepted things are sometimes incorrect. And she was pushed against by traditional scientists, and yet her findings were accurate. So just remember, we need diversity in the careers. And it's not just because it feels good for us, but it's because we really need diverse thinking, and we need that to make our better informed decisions, right? Okay, Melissa, we're ready for the next one. So if we need diversity, it's important to think, how do students make decisions about what they do for a career, or what career path they choose? The Manufacturing Institute of the United States asked that question, and they found that most students report that the biggest influence on their future career was their own experience. So they had to have an experience in that field. Second biggest factor was their mother or father's influence, and then it was teachers and guidance counselors. When I give this presentation, to a live audience, I always ask, what does that tell you, or what's your reaction to that? Maybe I'll ask Melissa, what's your reaction to that, Melissa?
That my reaction is that it seems like there's a lot of artificial gatekeeping to certain careers, because I might not have that experience, or my mother or father, they each only have one career, so that would limit my careers as well.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point. I always think this reminds us that students need experiences in careers, right? So through CTE, they get to try out careers, they get to do career exploration, and they're able to, do work-based learning often, have guest speakers come in, and this is essential for making those career decisions. So if you have no experience in a STEM field, neither one of your parents were involved in a STEM field, it's highly unlikely that you're going to go into a STEM field. So we need diversity in the workplace. Students make decisions when they have experience, right? So let's go to our next slide. Melissa, do you mind forwarding it?
I'm on the ELL slide of my screen.
Great, perfect. Okay,
Is that the one? Okay.
Yeah. So CTE could be the answer. One of the issues is CTE itself does not have a lot of diversity. There's often a lack of diversity. For example, in New York City, 10.8% of the city's population were English language learners, and yet only 5.3% were involved in CTE. Myself, in Nashua, New Hampshire, we found that we had a 20% English language learner population in our district, and only 2.3% were involved in CTE. So there are some barriers, and there's a lack of diversity within career and technical education. So we need diversity. Students need experiences with their careers to make decisions, and yet CTE is lacking some diversity. So often English language learners then are stuck right in these taking art class multiple times or taking PE multiple times. So let's keep going. So what has happened is Perkins 5, the federal government, has decided that we need to understand, you're going to want to go back one, Melissa, you don't want. We need to understand special populations. We need to identify that there are some students which we need to reach out to and make sure that they feel included and create pathways for them. So I'm not going to go over these definitions. If you're all in CTE, you understand the special populations. And then non-traditional are students who are in courses where maybe they comprise 25% of the individuals who would be employed in that field are a different gender. So for example, males in cosmetology or females in engineering. This is a great video. We can return back to it just so that we can save time for questions and move forward. It is a program we started in Nashua about drones and technology. It was designed for females, girls in STEM. And the video is really inspiring because the girls really react to that idea of, wow, I didn't realize this career was available to me. I didn't realize that I wanted to go into this career. And now that I've had an experience with it, I'm interested in going into it. So just suffice to say that the federal government has recognized we need diversity, and this is one of the solutions. So keep going, Melissa, next slide. And here's where UDL comes in, guys. UDL is in all federal legislation that governs education, including Perkins 5. So when you're writing your Perkins plans or you're thinking about spending funding, UDL as a method for professional development, as a tool for designing technology, and as a tool for creating curriculum is all written into Perkins 5. So it's been recognized as a way to increase diversity and help increase special populations' access to CTE. So now we're going to keep going. The last thing we want to say is we've talked a lot about what UDL is. The impact that UDL has on students when it is applied in a CTE classroom is remarkable. What happens when you start to embed UDL strategies into CTE is you start to get students increase success and increase persistence. And that's really important, especially as we look at, I know completers is not as important now with Perkins 5, but we want to see students reach their goals through CTE and not be dropping out of our classes. So UDL really supports that practice of student success and persistence, especially, and we're going to talk about this, around the way that we design assessments and the social emotional pieces of the classroom, the academic supports that we offer, and then the self-expectation and the expectation of the teacher for the student. So reflect and refresh. Any gut instincts or responses to this, Melissa, or we get now to how we apply it?
Just my gut instinct is when I look at that engagement column, when I think about CTE, I feel like CTE is all over that engagement column. When I think about relevance, authenticity, authentic products, it's harder to figure out authentic products maybe in your traditional classroom than it is in a CTE classroom. Foster collaboration and community as a way to sustain effort and persistence. Those are all on that green column. So I say that to point out that many educators, when they first start with UDL, they start in that green column and then they move on to the purple and the blue. But CTE seems to already naturally kind of have that green column all handled. And so then it will be, you are at a better advantage as a CTE teacher to then move on to the purple and the blue.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great reaction. And I think that's important, and maybe why I wanted to start this webinar out this way. I know a lot of you are familiar with CTE, but we do have some folks who aren't, and hopefully this will enlighten or at least share some information about CTE. But so often when we have PD, I just want to reiterate this, we are sort of, CTE teachers don't find themselves relating to the PD because their classes are already engaging, right? They are already hands-on. Students are excited to be there. UDL can celebrate that and tell CTE teachers, here's why it's working. Here's why what you're doing is working. You may not have the same pedagogy or the same training as a teacher and background. So let me show you what research says about why your strategies are working. And now let's make them work even better. So
you have one more question in the chat. Someone would like to hear more about failure as a feature of learning and how does that work? How is that used in the assessment process?
Yeah, that's great. So great question. I think of failure as being really essential in career and technical education because when we think about folks going out into the career world, I wore my Nobody's Perfect t-shirt today. I've already had some stuttering on the camera. My dog is barking in the background, right? So that we're going to experience failure. And I think so often assessments are tied to grades and students get very fearful about failure. There's no room for a student to fail when we have a high stakes test or we're tying a grade to everything if they're very concerned about their grade point average, right? But if we can create spaces in CTE where a student maybe doesn't know how tight to make a lug nut on a car wheel, or maybe a student makes a mistake in the amount of how much they fill a pipette and then it throws their experiment off in biotechnology. We don't have to grade them on that, right? We need to show them that mistakes happen. We need to show them a pathway to learn from that failure. And then we need to make sure that they can go out into the real world with the skills that they need to move on from failure, and also not always be tying it to a graded assessment. Does that seem like an answer, Melissa, or do you want to weigh in on that too?
No, it sounds great.
Okay. Yeah, and there are things called stuck stations, and I could probably provide some information on that. It's in our third webinar, right? Didn't Sam went over that in our third webinar. So if you're able to get the third webinar on, which is focused on virtual learning, then you can see what Sam put in, which is really around stuck stations and creating these spaces for students to practice that failure. Okay, talent is universal, but opportunity is not. All I want you to do is really think about this quote as we continue to move forward with UDL and CTE. Let it sink in, maybe take a deep breath and think about it. If you want to weigh in on the chat, I'd love to know what you think when someone says to you, talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And how does that apply to CTE? Or maybe just how does that apply to your own classroom? Okay, so here's what I feel like I should do a drum roll. Here's what we've been waiting for. So now let's take UDL and let's apply it in the CTE classroom. So UDL tells us that we need to design in ways that anticipate barriers. I'm going to have Melissa weigh in. I'm going to ask for Melissa to weigh in on all this, but I'm going to share my information with you. So physically, it's important to start with physically, in the physical classroom, we need to design so that we're anticipating barriers, right? And then I'm also going to talk about the remote classroom. My experience with anticipating barriers actually came from a student, Henry, who was an ELL student. Henry wanted to be an electrician, but we didn't find this out until his senior year. And when an intro to electricity teacher shared this with us, shared that he was interested, and we were able to get him into our CTE program, right? So there was one barrier already. He was a senior, so no one was letting him into our first year electrical program. We removed that barrier. Then in order for him to be working as an electrician, get his apprenticeship card, he needed to have $30 and he needed to have a photo ID, right? He needed to go get a passport photo. And then he could start working as an apprentice electrician through the CTE program. Henry never went and got the passport photo. I checked in with him so many times. Finally, I just called him in and said, what is happening? I reached out to him personally. We sat in my office. We wrote a check for him for $30 from the center. He was working full-time after school, and B, didn't know where he could go to get a passport photo, right? So I didn't realize that that was a barrier for many of our students. What we did is we went to the graphic design teacher, and she now takes those photos, so students don't even have to go out and get passport photos for their apprenticeship card. But we solved that problem, but we weren't able to anticipate it. But now that we knew about it, we can anticipate that barrier. In the physical classroom, it's really important to think, what barriers might students be experiencing, especially those special population students who are highly likely to drop out or may not even be able to access our classes. What are the barriers and how can we remove them? So Melissa, maybe you want to weigh in on that, and then I'll share how we designed remotely to remove barriers.
Remind me of his name?
Henry.
Henry. So, and thinking about Henry, it's very interesting. They had those physical barriers to actually even entering the classroom. And then you have to think about Henry and his experience as he gets into the classroom, and what might there be if he didn't know where to go for a passport photo. Maybe he has less familiarity with the area, or less familiarity with even maybe the system. And so when you're referring to things, you have to think about, what other supports can I give Henry to let him know the things that maybe other students might know automatically? Or how can I instead have these options so that if you don't know what it means to go to a testing center and take a career test, there's this paper that can explain it, and it's in the environment. So we're not we're not picking on Henry, or we're not pointing out Henry doesn't know, but it's in the environment for everybody that doesn't know, because there might be some other students that also could use that support. So anything that you're thinking about that you have a particular experience with a student that you say, okay, I have to design this support for him, you can go ahead and put that in the environment because others may need it. And that's what makes it universally designed.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Melissa. And we also want to think, this is why it's important to remember who our CTE teachers are. So they might not have a ton of experience thinking about how to design barriers. So if you can use UDL to talk with them and say, you know, UDL is a strategy, we first think about barriers. That's a whole new mindset. And it's important to just remember that our CTE teachers just probably aren't coming from the same pedagogical background as our other educators. So, you know, their experience might be teaching people who are on the job, who've already been hired, you know, so it's just really important to think, who are our CTE educators and how do we help them anticipate barriers? So in the remote learning world, a lot of barriers, right? And so I've spent some time doing workshops for CTE educators, just helping them think, how can I offer office hours, right? Sit down one-on-one with students to talk them through things. Can I offer office hours in the evening? You know, a lot of kids are coming online at 8 p.m. I've had teachers who've had much more success doing that. Sometimes teachers will say, well, a kid isn't showing up, they're not trying, right? In UDL, we would say, how can I design this lesson better so the student will be maybe more likely to show up? And one way is to maybe ask the students, what barriers are you experiencing? Or ask the students to weigh in, what barriers do you think your friends are experiencing, right? Because sometimes they don't want to come out and say that it's a barrier for them. So I think for UDL, we have to think about anticipating barriers. And when we're working with CTE educators, we just need to help them understand and think about barriers. They're going to want to remove barriers. CTE teachers are wonderful people. We just need to help them understand that there are barriers for students. Okay, and there's more ideas in the bit.ly. You have a link to the slides, and I have more ideas in the speaker notes that you can access. Okay, so this one is about making it relevant. So in the physical classroom, CTE teachers do a great job making things relevant, right? You know, let's learn to, as I said, rotate these tires, because if you don't, they're going to go bald and the car will crash, right? Really much easier to make things relevant. One thing that we can do when we think about moving to a remote learning environment to make things relevant is to actually use our household projects. So this is a photo of the raised beds that my husband built for me, and then also a manufacturing 3D printer. So we bought a 3D printer to make masks. My husband teaches manufacturing in woodshop, and he did a whole series of videos on the mask making process. He also teaches woodshop, so when he built the raised beds, he went through the whole process of how do you spec out the wood, how do you do the drawings, to make things relevant for students, to make sure that they are feeling, you know, like this learning still matters to them. And what was really interesting is when he called home, because there were some parents, you know, some students who were not showing up, and he wanted to see what their barriers were and check in. Parents were saying things like, I'm so glad you're having them do raised beds. I want raised beds at my house, you know? So it became relevant not just for the students, but for the parents as well. So when we think about remote learning, especially if we have to keep doing remote learning in the fall, or we have to do some hybrid, would really encourage CTE teachers to think, how do I make this relevant to my own life? So I might have to show students my family or show them some projects I'm working on. And how do I make it relevant to them? How do I work on projects or demonstrate skills that they could use right there in their own home? So Melissa, anything you want to weigh in there?
No, looks great. I guess my question would be, how can you make the assignment open enough so that students who varying materials at their home could accomplish the task?
Absolutely.
If I don't have wood.
Yeah, it's a great question. So he never actually assigned them to build raised beds. If they wanted to, they were, you know, invited to do that, and that was exciting, and some of their parents wanted them to do it. But it's something like, I'm building raised beds in my backyard. What kind of wood should I use? And then they would research the wood, right? And then weigh in, and he would say, oh, some of those are great responses. This would be really useful. I chose not to use pressure treated wood because pressure treated wood, while it's cheaper, and Melissa weighed in on it being cheaper, great job, it leaches into the dirt, the soil, and my wife doesn't want chemicals in our vegetables, right? So not really necessarily requiring them to physically make the project all the time, although that can happen successfully, but having them weigh in on helping you as you think about how do I make the project, right? And giving you advice that's very relevant to you and to the work that's being done.
That addresses one of the questions in the chat, saying the demonstrations are one thing, but how do instructors assess whether or not the students can do this thing? So that idea of giving you tips and helping you decide how to do it.
Yeah, again, UDL, we would want to offer a variety. We're going to talk about this. We're actually going to watch one of the videos. It's not perfect, but I think it will give us a sense of what we're talking about. So let's keep going. So the last thing I wanted to share here was when we design assessments, you want to just go back one more, Melissa? When we design assessments in CTE, whether it's in a remote learning environment or in a physical environment, we really need to think of, these are my recommendations for us to have conversation with ourselves if we're a teacher, or conversations with our teachers if we're an administrator. So are we co-designing the assignment at CAST and with UDL? It's very important to create buy-in. It's very important to make things relevant. So are we regularly asking for the students' feedback? This could apply remotely too. So it's very important to say, dear class, we worked on this project for the last week. Was it relevant to you? I know teachers had conversations with students who said, I didn't like that project. It was too hard to do remotely. Let's do a new one. Can we make suggestions? So creating buy-in and being honest with your students. I've never taught remotely before. I'm going to try out this project. Please, along the way, give me feedback. Is going to be a very successful technique, co-designing, right? When we think about our assessments, UDL tells us, let's build in choice. So do your assessments offer multiple ways for students to demonstrate their knowledge, right? So if we ask the student to create their own raised beds in their backyard, can they draw it? Can they diagram it on the computer? Could they call you and just tell you about what the raised beds would look like? Could they, what are a variety of ways? Could they send you a picture they found on Pinterest of what they would like to create? So are there a variety of ways for students to demonstrate that they can understand what you're asking? Embrace variability. It's really important that we think about diversity. We talked about diversity in the beginning. If we don't create assessments that embrace diversity, so assessments that allow for people to maybe it's make raised beds for vegetables. Maybe it's, someone wants to make a feeding bucket for their horses, right? So really embracing that variability and the variability of learner experience is essential, especially when we think about our special populations and our non-traditional students, right? Making sure that we have, if we're going to show a video, does the video show women working in that field? If we're going to show a video, can it have a Spanish translation included? Just how do we embrace and celebrate variability through our assessments? And then lastly, it's really important to think about how assessments create connection, not just between what the student is learning and the skill that they're going to demonstrate, but can we design assessments that connect students to the real world, to working? So I think about can we design assessment around writing a resume or doing an interview? And could we ask the student to come online and interview with someone else? Maybe we're thinking in a remote world. Could we invite a manufacturer to sit in on a Zoom call with us and conduct some interviews with us? So we'll do the interviewing and model it for the students while they're watching, right? We really want to make sure that we're giving students the skills to make connections once they leave our classrooms. Any thoughts you want to weigh in here, Melissa?
No, I think I'd like to see the video.
Okay, great, guys. So you're going to see my daughter and you're going to see my husband, and this is not a perfect video. But what I want you to see is me, trying to talk to my husband about UDL, and then him trying to absorb that and at least put a little bit into his remote learning practice.
All right.
So the gate, come on. This is where it's put together. There you go. Whoa, bring in your last assignment before the weekend. Your daily question is, how do you like your eggs? How do you like your eggs? Leave it in the comment section. Your assignment today is to fix something that needs fixed. You need to send me proof. Can be a note from your mom or dad. Proof could be checking your power school grade, showing up to office hours and tell me about it. Proof could be taking a picture of what you fixed. My proof is this video. Enjoy. Sometimes there's things you got to fix. You got to use all the skills and just get it done so that the boss, those you love just have a project complete. So you use all the tools in the shed just to get it done. My wife's been bugging me to fix the lid so the chickens don't have a wet place anymore. So that's what I'm attempting to do. So although we're going to put some screws and nails in this thing, an alternate piece of plywood instead of the 1/4-inch slats that I'm not sure where they found. I think it's important at some point to talk about whether or not something's a quality purchase, and that's why you want to read the spec section before you click buy on the internet. Me and you and me, we'll get through this together. Office hours from 2 to 3 today. Show up if you want to fix your grade. Sayonara.
Yeah, so I want to just say I'm seeing that a lot of folks are asking about, okay, so understanding is one thing, but demonstrating is another. I want to address that, and I'm going to do it in a couple ways, and then we can talk about the UDL strategies we see in the video. Students, when we shifted to remote learning, we were learning in a crisis situation, right? We weren't able to do that shift, at least the areas I know about, smoothly and really thoughtfully, right? We just had to make the shift. So I want to go on record, and I've written a lot about this, saying that students cannot have the same experience, right? If you're learning to use a lathe and you're standing next to it and you're using it, you will not have the same experience as watching a video and learning about the lathe. And we can't expect them to have that same experience if they don't have a lathe at their house, which most people don't, right? So it's okay to understand that the experience has to sort of inherently and naturally be different, right? And I think it's important just to say that. It feels like a relief maybe for some people in some cases, just to say, we don't have the equipment, we cannot give exactly the same experience. Can we watch a lathe video? Yes. Can we learn about safety on the lathe? Yes. But we cannot have that tangible experience of learning how much pressure to put on the tool to make sure that you get certain cuts, right? Okay. So but now that we're going back to school in some capacity, what I would encourage CTE teachers to think about is to prepare for if we have to go remote again, or we have to do a hybrid. So what are some ways that we could potentially have students be learning something remotely and then come into the classroom possibly for part of the time? Are there ways to see if a student can actually do an activity? Yes, they could make videos of themselves. That's a great way, using their phones. Still, we're relying on a technology. They could demonstrate to you by showing up to office hours, as Abe was saying in his video, and literally do the thing in front of you so that you can assess whether they're able to do it. We're going to have to be get creative with this, but and this brings me to my last two slides. So go to the next one quickly, and then we'll go to the final one, Melissa. So the purpose of education, UDL makes this point, is not just to make it accessible. It is important to make it accessible. But the next slide, you can go to the next slide. But really the purpose of education is to help students learn to learn. And I think this UDL truism, I don't know if I just made up a word, but is especially important in CTE, because when we think about students in career and technical education, our electricians and our cosmetologists and our plumbers and our entrepreneurs, they're going to have to be able to teach themselves new skills. Even if you teach them everything in your classes that they need to know, when they get out into the career, into the real world, there are going to be things that that are going to come new, that they're going to have to teach themselves. So when we think about remote learning for CTE, it's really important to think about using UDL to teach students how they learn and how they can teach themselves new information. I think that's really, the big takeaway. There's going to be novel situations that will require them to independently discover answers, and we need to make sure that they can do that, and UDL is one way for us to do that. So Melissa, I didn't know if you wanted to weigh in on some of the UDL strategies you saw in the video, and then we have like 3 minutes to take questions.
Yes, so he did offer a lot of choices. They had a choice of topic in terms of what they were going to fix. They had a choice of how they're going to demonstrate what they knew to him in terms of videos and chats and coming to office hours. He was doing a modeling for them and modeling what he fixed. So there's definitely a lot of UDL moves in there. Also, I would encourage folks who want some more specifics about how does UDL reflect in the CTE classroom. I think the second webinar would be a great place to go, because we went through some CTE goals and some ways you can embed choices in those goals. Also, I would direct people to the first webinar and the Todd Rose video, because what was really interesting about the Todd Rose video is he gave a metaphor about airplanes and airplane pilot seats, and they used to only be one way, and so there was only one pilot, one type of pilot that could fit in that seat. They had to be certain size and on all dimensions, and it was built to the average. And once they made those seats adjustable, then there was a better talent of pilots that were able to come in. There was more diverse and a more diverse group. You had female pilots, all kinds of things that they were able to, and in some cases they probably had, were able to pick more specifically around the talent of being a pilot. So I think about that as I relate it to the CTE classroom. I think about what are those things in the CTE classroom that we have always assumed have to be a certain way, and do they have to be a certain way? And can we challenge how we think about that and think about how can we build in choices for students? So that would be my like big picture UDL thoughts on it.
In the chat, I also shared, folks were asking about the video, they want to watch it on their own. So I did share that in the chat. But if you have the bit.ly, you should be able to access it as well. And it's not to say that that's like the best, by any means, the best demonstration of UDL. What I'm trying to say is UDL offers CTE educators, and maybe all educators, and that keeps coming up in the chat too, really a way to make sure that we're being inclusive and we're including all students and we're thinking about those special populations. It offers us a way to design assessments and design curriculum and design strategies that make sure that there aren't barriers and that students can access the learning. And UDL can help us whether we're in the physical classroom or in the remote world. And I do want to acknowledge that CTE is a unique beast when we think about remote learning, because of the fact that you need specialized tools and you need labs. And that's why I try to really distill it down to like, what can the takeaway be? It can still be that students need to learn how to learn. There are open educational resources for CTE educators. If you're interested, I am hosting just a discussion about CTE and remote learning and open educational resources for CTE teachers. So I can share that link with Amy maybe, and she can push it out if folks are interested. Maybe that seems like the best avenue.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
And just lastly, as we say every time, that some of this can sound overwhelming, but we want you to remember that UDL is not a checklist. You don't have to do everything on that in that graphic organizer every time. Just think about, based on your goals, how can you create multiple routes to your goals. And as we said, and it's in the chat, it said it's resonated with someone, that we're teaching students how to learn so that they can continue to grow in their fields, not just what to learn. And it's different in every context. As we know, it's a little different in CTE than it is in the regular ed classroom. So lastly, this is our contact. If you want to get more training in your sites, you can contact Maddie at CAS.org if you want something specific to your work site.
So with that, go ahead, Amanda. Did you have a last comment?
No, that was great. Yeah, it's excellent. And I just wanted to say thank you. I know a lot of you came to all 4 of the webinars, so hopefully you found it useful and you're just wanting more. And if you only joined us for this one, I hope that you found it useful as well.
I want to thank both of you for presenting for us. This has been a fantastic series, and we do plan to have a relationship with CAS moving forward and bring you back virtually into Illinois, hopefully one day in real life, but right now this has worked out really well. For everyone on the line, I do want to let you know that I did post where you can find the resources on the ICSPS site. It is under CTE. There is a UDL block, and just go there and look at all the different resources we have. In addition to that, tomorrow you will be, I think it does happen tomorrow, even on a Saturday, you will get an email from the GoToWebinar system. On there, you have your certificate of attendance, and then you also have a link to an evaluation. We encourage you to please complete those evaluations. You've gotten those, if you've attended all 4, you've gotten those from each of the 4 webinars. It helps us decide and determine in what capacity to bring CAS back. What are those things you're needing? Where are those areas that you'd like to see additional professional development? So I don't want to say goodbye because it's been a great series, but I do want to say thank you so very much, and I'm sure we will be talking and seeing you again. And yes, Amanda, if you want to share that with me, I would be happy to share that out to all of the attendees for all 4 webinars, because I think we are a CTE group and we do serve career and technical education, and that's the area that we're really focusing on, is how do we make UDL present in CTE. So thank you all for your time. Everyone, please have a wonderful weekend. Stay healthy, stay well, get outside. And thank you so much.
Bye.